Undercover.
This is the Princess Rosalia.
But you may call me Your Highness.
Under Fire.
How about a weapon beyond your wildest dreams?
You couldn't imagine my wildest dreams.
And under threat from an old adversary.
You're going to build him a bomb.
It ain't gonna happen.
Bugs, next Saturday at 8:05 on BBC One.
The ultimate story of revenge in the first of tonight's films in 20 minutes. Roseanne Barr is a jilted lover out to get even, and Meryl Streep's top of the hit list for The She-Devil. First on BBC One, a little later than scheduled, the main evening news and sport with Michael Burke.
A Conservative MP has threatened to resign and wipe out the government's majority in Parliament. Sir George Gardner says he'll force a by-election if he loses the support of his local party. Israel's captured the man they say is behind the latest Hamas suicide bombings. And Rangers break hearts to take the league and cup double. Good evening. The right-wing Conservative MP, Sir George Gardner, has threatened to resign his seat if his local party decides not to adopt him again for the general election. His constituency executive council has already voted narrowly against selecting him again. The whole local party will make the final decision next month. Sir George says he won't be a lame duck MP. If he loses, he says he'll force a by-election and threaten the government's majority in the Commons.
Today it was business as usual for Sir George Gardner in his constituency, but the right-wing MP has now gone public in his battle with local Tories who want to dump him as their party candidate. For now, John Major can only watch helplessly as Sir George delivers his ultimate deterrent and threatens to force a by-election.
In the unlikely event that I do not command the confidence of my grassroots workers, then I certainly do not intend to limp on as a lamed-up Member of Parliament, unable to push Tory values at Westminster, or even have much clout on behalf of my constituents either.
The confrontation dates back to John Redwood's failed Tory leadership challenge. Sir George upset party loyalists by backing Mr Redwood against John Major. His Eurosceptic views have also annoyed local Tories. The Reigate Conservatives will decide his future next month. Their chairman insists Sir George will take the blame if he forces a by-election no one wants.
There's no doubt about it, it would be a disaster for the government, it would be a disaster for the country in my view, but that would be up to Sir George.
Senior Tories are watching developments. Some want Sir George to put the good of the party first, despite his reputation as something of a schemer and his skill at brinkmanship.
George is an old hand. He's a very adept on the Westminster corridors. I just think that he would be a very great pity if, after 22 years in the House, he were to take a decision that would lead to his political career ending in bitterness.
With a Tory majority of 17,000, this seat ought to be safe territory. But if the row ends in a by-election, the disappearance of John Major's majority couldn't be ruled out. Central Office is keeping out of the row. Senior Conservatives know there's very little the party headquarters can do to influence the outcome. But they also know it's extremely rare for a sitting Tory MP to be dumped as a candidate. And they're counting on the instinctive caution of members in Reigate to avoid the dangers and limit the damage from this latest outburst of infighting in the party. John Pinar, BBC News, at Conservative Central Office.
The Bosnian Serb leader Radovan Karadzic is reported to have handed over some of his powers to his deputy. Western diplomats say the news from the official Serb news agency means that Mr Karadzic has effectively stepped down as president. Paul Wood reports from Belgrade.
Radovan Karadzic won the battle to get the Prime Minister of his choice, but Western diplomats say this may be the last time he's able to exert decisive influence within the Bosnian Serb government. A statement on Cerna is being seen as proof that his influence is at an end. Some powers and duties are being surrendered, and he's to concentrate on the economy and the welfare of former soldiers. The international mediator Carl Bildt is unworried by the choice of a Karadzic loyalist to be the new Prime Minister.
I'm here to implement the full implementation of the peace agreement. That's not primarily a question of personality, it's a question of policy line. although of course there are personalities that more or less clearly are supporting that particular policy line. But primarily, of course, it's a question of a policy with implications of a wide range.
Mr. Karadzic has proved resilient in the past, and the real extent of his remaining authority may become clear in the coming weeks and months. But the interpretation in Western embassies is that he's now no longer in charge. In the words of one envoy, he can now busy himself with his poetry and his defence submission for The Hague. Paul Wood, BBC News, Belgrade.
The Islamic terrorist group Hamas has threatened to avenge the capture of one of its leading members by Israel. Hassan Salameh was seized by Israeli troops after being shot. He's thought to have organised the recent suicide bombing campaign, which killed nearly 60 Israelis.
This evening, Hassan Salameh is in hospital in Jerusalem, badly wounded. As soon as he is off the critical list, he will face a major interrogation. Last night, in the Hamas stronghold of Hebron on the West Bank, he was shot by Israeli soldiers who had tried to stop his vehicle. He escaped, but was captured at a local hospital where he was being treated for bullet wounds. He told witnesses that he wanted to be a martyr, not a prisoner. The man who had been driving Salameh was also arrested. He shouted at the soldiers, "Shoot me if you call yourselves men." Later he was named as Razik al-Rajub, a relative of the man who heads the main Palestinian security police organization in the West Bank. By this morning, the Israelis were issuing this warning.
We are carrying out an ongoing campaign against those terrorists, and we are chasing them. We crack down on them, on the people who send them, and we're going to get each and every one of them.
The Israelis allege that Hassan Salameh planned 3 of the 4 suicide bombs that killed more than 60 people and shook this country to its roots in February and March. They destroyed the lead that the Prime Minister, Shimon Peres, had over the opposition and could still lose him this month's general election. Since then, Hebron has been the scene of dozens of Israeli operations against Hamas.
The Israeli government will count this as a big success, but it's still concerned there could be other suicide bombings between now and the elections, which are only 10 days away. Until then, there will be no relaxation in security. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Hebron.
The 4 British hostages released in Indonesia are on their way home. They're due to arrive at Heathrow early tomorrow, where they'll have a private reunion with their families before holding a news conference. David Willis reports from Kuala Lumpur, where the plane made a brief refuelling stop.
Just minutes before their long-awaited flight home, the 4 former hostages were whisked into Jakarta's Sukarno airport under police escort. As Scotland Yard detectives, who've been acting as advisors to the Indonesian military, cleared the way, they were ushered in, declining to answer reporters' questions. Ahead, a 14-hour flight, the choice of salmon or chicken, a no doubt welcome change from the berries they had to survive on in the jungle. Just 75 hours since they were rescued from an ordeal in which 10 people, including 2 of their fellow hostages, died, the 4 students are said to be traumatized. They're due to address a news conference in London in the morning, but their parents have been so inundated with offers of newspaper, book and film deals that they may choose to keep the full details of their story until later. They spent the flight sipping champagne and reading reports of their release in the British newspapers. From Malaysia, this flight goes on to London and an emotional and long-awaited reunion with their families. David Willis, BBC News, at Subang Airport in Kuala Lumpur.
Labour's Gordon Brown has said the party will push ahead with controversial plans to change child benefit. His proposal to cut payments for 16 to 18-year-olds had provoked criticism within the party. But speaking at Labour's Policy Forum in Manchester, designed to draw up detailed policy for the election, Mr Brown said difficult choices had to be made on welfare reform.
A caring leader showing concern for a deprived community. That was the image Labour set out to stage on Manchester's Moss Side estate today. It was coupled with a call for curbs on replica and deactivated guns by a party keen to reinforce its tough law and order credentials. Less welcome was the protest awaiting delegates to Labour's Policy Forum, convened, they say, to complete their programme for government. Concern over pensions was accompanied by traditional socialist remedies to safeguard the welfare state.
What you dare to say, what none of you dare say, is what's absolutely necessary, and that's to say we'll tax the rich.
Unmoved, key spokesman insisted the status quo, even on child benefit, could not survive.
At the moment, if you're on income support, you get no child benefit at all. If you go to Harrow or Eton, you do. If you're on a training scheme, you don't get child benefit. We want a system that works in the interests of keeping young people in education.
The Shadow Chancellor took that message into the hall, causing alarm to at least one senior backbencher.
See, I think ordinary Labour Party people are very committed to the welfare state and want to see a Labour government building it up, not cutting back on it.
Reassuring the grassroots has not been easy, and the powerful figure reminded his party today not to take them for granted.
We know that we've got to make some difficult choices, but we do it with our party, because at the end of the day, you have to have a manifesto. It has to be endorsed by a conference. It's not a kind of shadow cabinet document that everybody tells the world this is it. We go through conferences and we have proper constitutional procedures.
The Shadow Chancellor is confident the review will back his proposals on changes to child benefit for 16 to 18-year-olds. But there are powerful figures in the party yet to be convinced, and the tough decision on child benefit is only the first of a number of difficult decisions on welfare reform. Gito Harry, BBC News, Manchester.
Russia has urged Britain to reconsider its decision to expel 4 diplomats following the recent spying row. It said it was unjust and unacceptable. President Yeltsin's political opponents have accused him of exploiting the dispute to boost his popularity at home ahead of the election in June.
After months of languishing in the opinion polls, Boris Yeltsin is starting to call the tune in this election. On the campaign trail in Siberia today, he sprang yet another surprise, offering his political rivals a role in a future coalition government if they'll agree not to run against him in the race for the presidency.
I am ready to unite with anyone. I am ready to form a coalition government. The task is to keep those who do not want reform from seizing power.
Mr. Yeltsin sees this campaign as a crusade to keep the communists out of the Kremlin, and by offering an alliance with all candidates who favour reform and democracy, he's clearly hoping to put the Liberals' internal divisions and strife behind him. So far, though, the response from his potential allies has been mixed, and Communist Party leader Gennady Zyuganov today warned them that signing an alliance with Mr. Yeltsin would be political suicide. With 4 diplomats at the British embassy here about to leave Russia after being expelled for alleged espionage, the communists are accusing Mr. Yeltsin of exploiting the affair to boost his own election chances.
Moscow is still talking tough over the spying row, calling London's response in expelling 4 Russians arbitrary and unfair. But Boris Yeltsin has now shown the voters that he can be a strong defender of Russia's interests, and it's likely that both sides will agree to let the matter drop. Martin Sixsmith, BBC News, Moscow.
Now, with news of how Rangers won the Scottish Cup and the rest of the sport, here's Adam Minot.
Yes, Rangers have completed the double again and confirmed their place at the top of Scottish football. In a very different game from last week's FA Cup final, Rangers overwhelmed Hearts 5-1 in the Tennant Scottish Cup final with a hat-trick for Gordon Durie.
It was a meeting of 2 vastly contrasting clubs, all conquering Rangers against Hearts without a trophy for 33 years. Briefly, they hinted at ending the drought as they started brightly, but once Rangers had gone ahead when Gordon Durie's pass was converted expertly by Michael Laudrup, the outcome was hardly in doubt. If the first goal was Rangers at their incisive best, the second owed much to Hearts goalkeeper Gilles Rousset. Laudrup's cross seemed harmless enough, but what happened next put the game beyond the Edinburgh team. Gordon Durie soon made it 3-0 with man of the match Laudrup fulfilling the role of provider this time, and after a consolation goal for Hearts, Durie scored twice more, the second completing his hat-trick and Rangers' emphatic 5-1 victory. It was the 12th time Richard Gough has collected a major trophy on the club's behalf. 3 weeks after their 8th consecutive league title, Rangers had done the double again.
Can't describe it, fantastic support again, once again, you know. But it gets better every time for me. I mean, I don't know how many more of these occasions I've got left, but I'm just savouring every moment of it.
For once, Paul Gascoigne had been reduced to a supporting role, but the gulf between the double winners and the rest of Scottish football remains as wide as ever. Duncan Jones, BBC News.
England's preparation for Euro 96, now just 3 weeks away, looks well on course with an easy win in a friendly against Hungary at Wembley. There was a perfect return from injury for Tottenham's Darren Anderton, who scored twice in the 3-0 victory.
Hungary were the first team to beat England at Wembley, a 6-3 defeat in 1953, which demolished national footballing self-confidence. The main architect, Ferenc Puskás, was back today, but this time watching a Hungarian side lacking ambition and up against players fighting for places in Euro 96. Blackburn's Jason Wilcox announced his arrival at international level with his first touch, a header against the bar in the 2nd minute. But it took another half an hour for England to shake off a reluctance to attack. Sheringham's cross was missed by Ferdinand, but not by Darren Anderton, back after missing most of this season through injury. A timely boost for England, along with the rediscovery of David Platt's goal touch. Paul Ince's free kick early in the second half gave him the chance to put England 2-0 up. Anderton's second, 10 minutes later, secured a comfortable win. 2 more friendlies follow in China and Hong Kong. But for Terry Venables and his squad, the phony war ends on June the 8th against Switzerland in the European Championship. Neil Bennett, BBC News.
Michael Schumacher will start in pole position for tomorrow's Monaco Grand Prix after setting the fastest lap in the qualifying today. Damon Hill, who's leading this year's World Championship, thought he'd done enough to take pole when he recorded the best time of the day near the end of the qualifying session. But then Schumacher stormed round the winding Monte Carlo streets in his Ferrari to snatch top position on the grid for the 2nd successive race. Colin Montgomery goes into the final round of the Benson & Hedges International Open in Oxfordshire tomorrow with a 3-stroke lead. Montgomery, on 9 under, recorded 7 birdies today, including this one on the final hole for a round of 67. His nearest challenger is Ian Woosnam, who scored a 68. The former Olympic gold medal javelin thrower Tessa Sanderson is on course for a record-equalling 6th Olympic Games. Sanderson, who's now aged 40, came out of retirement at the International Games in Bedford today, and she easily beat the Olympic qualifying standard with a best throw of 60.64 metres. And Sally Gunnell won the 400 metres at the same meeting. She'll run her first competitive hurdle race for over a year and a half next week. Michael.
And some of the world's greatest rugby union players were in action in Dublin today in a special match supporting the peace process in Northern Ireland. More than 30,000 people, including children who'd lost relatives in the violence, were at Lansdowne Road for the game between Ireland and the Barbarians.
As one of the English players said, today was much more than a rugby game. Many of the world's best players in Ireland in the name of peace, including Francois Pienaar of South Africa and David Campese of Australia, unfit to play, but who made the long journeys anyway, just to be there. Children who'd lost relatives in the Shankill Road bombing by the IRA and in the Loyalist pub shooting in Grey Steel were introduced to the players. Also there was the best friend of Tim Parry, killed by an IRA bomb in Warrington.
It means a great deal because it shows that people come together to support the peace process, and I think the main thing what everyone wants now is peace.
One of the former Irish internationals who organised the game after the Docklands bombing said the day was for young people.
This is a day for the youth. If you look around the children here, we don't want the children for the next 27 years putting up what they had to put up with and other people like me. So we want peace. That's what we want out of here. We want peace.
A minute's silence, then a game of more than 100 points, all from tries and conversions. The first, a 3-pass length of the field movement ended by Rory Underwood. Ireland had their moments with 2 late tries, the most spectacular by James Topping, appropriately of Ulster. Philip de Glanville collected the Peace Trophy, made from a shell casing fired in the salute to President Clinton when he arrived in Northern Ireland last December. 70-38 to the Barbarians. The real winner, ordinary people and their hopes for peace. Dennis Murray, BBC News.
That's all from the newsroom tonight. From Adam and me, good night.
Hello, good evening. I know we need the rain, but spare a thought for the competitors in the 10 Tours race tonight, because that's the West Country weather radar. Those bright echoes mean some very heavy rain up there on Dartmoor and probably on the tops of the Tours. It'll be sleet and snow that's falling. Now, if we take a look at the wider view, you can see how that rain area has been developing and moving northwards up the western side of England and Wales. You'll also notice we've got some heavy rain moving into southeastern England. Just recently, a thunderstorm developed in the southern North Sea, and it's all down to this little area of low pressure. It'll continue to track northwards overnight tonight. I think the worst of the rain and the sleet and snow over the high ground will be on the western side of England and Wales. And up in the far northwest, underneath clear skies, we're likely to have a touch of frost on the ground. That low pressure still with us tomorrow, so a lot of rain around, particularly for the western side of England and Wales throughout the day. A little bit of brightening going on the eastern side, so perhaps temperatures picking up there during the afternoon. But for much of Scotland, a dull day, particularly on the east coast, and eventually that rain arriving across in Northern Ireland. So it'll feel particularly chilly where it's wet and windy, but that brighter area in the southeast, temperature of 13, won't feel too bad at all.
Roseanne Barr's a she-devil out for revenge on Meryl Streep in the first of tonight's films in just a moment. But before that, on BBC One, a quick update on tonight's National Lottery draw. The 6 winning numbers are confirmed as 4, 12, 13, 33, 40 and 46. And the bonus number is 41. Early indications are that there is one jackpot winner this week, winning just over £10.2 million.
Cannes, the most glamorous and famous film festival in the world. Barry Norman is the man with inside knowledge, the man who knows the stars, the business, the shakers and movers, and he'll be bringing his special report from the south of France Wednesday at 11:10 on BBC One.
A real gangster B-movie later tonight here on BBC One, when a group of ageing mobsters try to relive the old days. Comic book dialogue comes thick and fast with the bullets in Babyface Morgan, now at the later time of 1 o'clock because of the earlier overrun at the Eurovision Song Contest. And that's also why we're a little late now on BBC One to the first of tonight's films. Roseanne Barr and Meryl Streep prove hell hath no fury like a woman scorned in She-Devil.